All right, morning class, I'm James. Today my speech is going to be on Medicare for All. So medical insurance could be a nightmare, it could be a lifesaver. At some point in time, everybody here has seen a healthcare provider and has made a payment, or your health insurance provider's made a payment for you, or a combination of both. So, over the last decade, numerous politicians have rhapsodized over a term called Medicare for All. The biggest one, or the most influential one that's talked about it, has been Senator Bernie Sanders. I'm sure most of you have seen it or at least heard of it. But what is Medicare for All? What does it mean for us? What does it mean for you? Right? According to John Greenberg from PolitiFact, Senator Sanders' Medicare for All would be a single national health insurance program covering all Americans. There'd be no premiums that you pay, no co-pays that you pay, and drug or medical prescriptions would be covered as well. Sounds great, right? So I've conducted significant research into this and have firsthand knowledge of this subject, having that I've had medical insurance. I've been paying for it now for about 36 years. Today I'm here to enlighten you with some facts of why Medicare for All is a bad idea for Americans at this time. First, we'll cover Medicare for All's extreme cost, and then we'll talk about the unfeasibility of the universal health care system in America. So, what will Medicare for All cost? According to Charles Blauhaus, he's the author of the paper, The Cost of a National Single-Payer Healthcare System, from the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, states that under conservative estimates that it's going to cost roughly $33 trillion over the next 10 years. So, how's that going to be paid? By us, of course, right? So there is a little silver lining. Right now, if you or your parents or anybody you know is paying health insurance premiums, that's going to disappear under Medicare for All, right? So there's some money saved, but again, according to Blauhaus, he states that doubling everybody's federal taxes by being individual or corporate income taxes, it still would not be nowhere near enough to cover the $33 trillion price tag. So, where's the rest of the money come from? Lawrence Seidman, he's a professor of economics at the University of Delaware, stated from the Journal of Politics, Policy and Law in the article, The Affordable Care Act versus Medicare for All, that the U.S. could enact a value-added tax, otherwise known as a VAT. The VAT is around, I believe 115 other countries use a VAT, and a VAT is a consumption tax that's placed on goods. So everyday items that you buy, a piece of chocolate, or you buy a new t-shirt, or whatever it is, there is a tax that is added onto it in increment levels from production to point of sale. So whoever produces it first, they get a tax portion put on it. And then all the way up to the person where you buy it at 7-Eleven, the mall, another tax is added onto it. So it can be as simple as 10 cents or up to hundreds of dollars, depending on how large the item or how expensive the item is. So, our income taxes are going to rise. The everyday goods that we buy, the prices are going to increase on them. But where are we going to get this extra money? Now, obviously note that we may save a little bit of money on the front end without not having to pay for health insurance anymore, but still the everyday items that you buy are now going to be taxed as well. What about low-income families? What about fixed-income families? They don't have that extra money, disposable income, to get rid of. Which brings me to my next point of the unfeasibility of universal health care. Dr. Harold Pollack, professor of social sciences at the University of Chicago, stated from the Journal of Health, Politics, in the article, Medicare for All, if it were politically possible, would necessarily replicate the defects of our current system. That it would prove more difficult due to our political environment, who would have to formulate a new policy, all new policies on the Medicare for All. All right? Additionally, state governments would have to pass legislature and make budget adjustments because under Medicare for All, Medicare and Medicaid, the current Medicare and Medicaid, would disappear. Absolutely. We currently have private health insurance that we're covered under, and we have Medicare and Medicaid. But Medicare and Medicaid is not set up to absorb 318 million Americans who would need to be covered under Medicare for All. The infrastructure isn't there, and we'd also have to establish obviously under policy, the Medicare for All and Afford or universal health care, determining on which politician is saying Medicare for All or universal health care. Let alone it would cost trillions of dollars just to initiate or implement a Medicare for All policy for Americans. Which brings me to the conclusion. We've talked about what Medicare for All is and the cost of implementing it and the unfeasibility of the universal health care in the USA. Our capitalistic society isn't really set up to have a universal health care system, nor would we be able to get to that point anytime soon. But currently you hear a lot of politicians, especially now that we're ramping up for the next presidential race, a lot of them are jumping on that bandwagon of Medicare for all, and they're getting a lot of hopes up of their constituents of, I want a Medicare for all, but not a single one of them has actually delved into this is going to be the costs. This is what's going to be required of every American to contribute to. Thank you.
All right, well, the proposition's clearly identified. The phrase "it's bad," that's a bad idea, I think makes it sound like it's a value claim. I do think that there is a factual issue here. It's just the phrasing is a little bit awkward on it. There's a reasonable preview. It's primarily costs and the lack of feasibility on this particular point that are the two supporting structures there, so that's not hard to follow. The background information talking about why we have to have this discussion, I thought that was pretty good. It justifies talking about this subject at this time, so that makes sense. On the first point concerning costs, there's a lot of information that you cite, and I thought you did an excellent job citing authorities, explaining what the costs would be and why those costs would be so high. The kind of the discussion of the value-added tax, there's a presupposition built in there that that's what we would have to have in order to be able to pay for those things. And I'm not saying that that isn't the case. I just think that you need a stronger argument that says that there was one piece of evidence that you had that doubling the income taxes wouldn't be enough to cover those sorts of things. Maybe then the argument is the most likely scenario would be a series of additional taxes similar to what they have in Europe, and then that might explain it. Of course, we could always just find, believe me, the government will find another way to tax us about something, so they'll start tracking our miles by GPS and charging us by the mile. You are contributing this much pollution to the atmosphere, so that means that you owe this much in terms of healthcare trade-offs. I'm sure that somebody is going to think of all of these things and do that. The VAT thing, I think, is a potential side issue that's not necessarily relevant to the main issue, which is the horrible cost that you're suggesting that this is going to be. One of the other things I think you need to do is you need to give people a context. $33 trillion over the next 10 years. Okay, well, that's $3.3 trillion a year. Well, what's the current federal budget? You might point out in contrast to in other words, if we spent nothing on anything else, we'd still be spending more on Medicare for all than we spend on everything else that we currently spend money on. There are ways in which you can sell this as a extremely costly issue, and I think maybe make a stronger point and still be describing something that's factual in nature. The issue of feasibility, I think, was not as well developed. There's some discussion about what the complications would be with the states, how we would have to make adjustments. I think one of the things that you miss an opportunity to talk about here is how the current infrastructure, you did say at one point that it's not really equipped to handle the 318 million people that it would have to cover. I'm going, does that mean because there aren't enough doctors, not enough hospitals, that there would be too much demand on resources, we don't have enough beds to do that? Is it because we're going to have a whole bunch of people who currently work in the healthcare industry that may not be working in the healthcare industry when Medicare for All takes over. I mean, all the insurance companies, I assume, are going to go away, and that's, I don't know how many thousands of jobs that you're talking about and positions, and you know, so that there are complications and technical issues that go involved in this. I think that's true. I just didn't get a very full picture of what those issues were in the description that you're giving us. I know that there's stuff there. I don't know what it is and how big a deal it is, and I think that would, you know, make your argument a little bit more convincing. It's nicely presented, and I like the conclusion of the speech as well. All right, thank you.